here today, the First Lady, and she's expressed a desire to sing our song. So, here's how we do it. I hope Gary hasn't forgotten the tune. I hope you haven't forgotten the words. I hope I haven't forgotten the words. And I hope you haven't forgotten the words. One, two, three. Take me out to the ball. Me out to the buy me some.
On the 18th of February 2019, the Monday morning quarterback. And as we normally do on Monday morning, we honor our late broadcast partner, Jerry Pippin, who died about 3 years ago from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. We are continuing to organize our broadcasts. Bear with us as we do that. Over the weekend, we presented Numbers Man. That is our macroeconomics program. It is available on many of our usual outlets. We're doing some corrections, incidentally, to our RSS feed. Hopefully we'll get that completed. But nonetheless, you can find us on Stitcher, Sneaker, Stitcher, Speaker. The Blog Talk will be there till the end of the month, February, and this is, of course, reminding you, this is African History Month, and we will have a special programming there. Some of ours is mini programming. We'll have a little of that today in a proposed basketball league for numerous African countries. We'll have that in our or prior to our, well, we'll do it in our sports roundup, I suppose. We still are working on the open source report. We'll get that out in the next 2 days or so. And we'll go merely along the way here. Let's firstly look at some information out of Iowa. We'll look at the candidates and the how the candidates have been playing to Iowa. I think we'll go to that first of all. And when we finish here, we'll also have some commentary from Face the Nation. The representative that will be on there, was on there, Congressman Hurd. He's from a district in Texas, a former CIA analyst type, and at the same time, he's an African American. He represents a border district. He is talking about the effects of the wall on ranchers. There are about 1,000 ranchers in that area that their enterprises will be disrupted by the wall. So there's some situations there coming up. And also there's an Emerson poll I was just looking at. I received a comment from someone about the Emerson poll. Now, the Emerson poll says that a majority in that of people polled were opposed to this particular wall adventure by DJ Trump. But overall, in terms of border extension or border security, and it all depends on how it's worded, that a majority were in favor of that. So you have to look at some of the polls very, very carefully. We did not do the poll at Crest Analytics. It was Emerson. Of course, they are a first-rate organization, according to the Nate Silver Shop. And they are, and they're across the street from the Common in Boston. So anyway, let's go to Iowa, and we're just looking at how candidates have visited Iowa. It's called the Iowa Starting Line, and your home for Iowa political news. And we'll go through some of these candidates we haven't really heard of. John Delaney, he used to be a Congress type from Maryland. He's been there 4 times. I won't go into when he's been there. Elizabeth Warren, she's been there 2 times. She was in Council Bluffs, Sioux City, Storm Lake, Ames, Des Moines. Some of the normal stops that you go to in January and in February. She was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, and Davenport. I believe Davenport is the Quad Cities. Julian Castro, he's out of San Antonio. He was in Iowa in January, and he was also in December in Des Moines, Sioux City, Boone, Iowa, Ames, Iowa, universities at those particular places. Kristen Gillibrand, senator from New York, she's been there twice. This month she did a swing through Cedar Rapids in Iowa City, University in Iowa City, University of Iowa is there. John Hickenlooper, he used to be the governor of Colorado. He was also there. Wait a minute. I guess he will be there. I'm looking at, the 23rd of February. He'll speak someplace. I'm not sure where that is. Doesn't matter. And Amy Klobuchar, she was there on the 17th. That was just yesterday. She did stops in Mason City, Knoxville, and Boehner. I'm not sure where that is at all. And she will also speak at a fundraiser in Kinney, Iowa, and in Des Moines, Iowa on the 21st. Kamala Harris, she will also be there on the 23rd. She'll campaign in some of the same places: Des Moines, Waterloo, Iowa, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, etc., etc. Andrew Yang, he's an entrepreneur. He's been there once. He was there in January. Mary Ann Wilkinson, I'm not sure who she is. But anyway, she was there. She announced in Des Moines and Iowa City. Sherrod Brown, he's a senator out of Ohio. He was there in January. He was in Mason City, Clear Lake, Perry, Waterloo, Dubuque, and Clinton, Iowa. And let's see, Twitter King Booker, he was there on the 8th. He was in Madison, Waterloo, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, Marshalltown, Iowa, and Des Moines. Des Moines are the usual stops, also in Ames. Iowa City is the University of Iowa. Did he do Ames? No, he didn't do Ames. Ames is the Iowa State University. Eric Holder was there. He was in Des Moines. At the Harkin Institute, I supported the former Senator Harkin when he ran for president. Steve Bullock, he's the governor of Montana. He was in Des Moines, Carroll, and Fort Dodge, Iowa. And Michael Bennett, he was or will be in Des Moines, Iowa. Some of the people that have appeared there. And it's called the Iowa Starting Line. Let me go to the front page of this. And I'm not sure what's on the front page. I was just looking. So the 2020 Iowa caucuses, we'll take a quick look at it. And we'll see where we are here. For those who have been involved in multiple caucus cycles, we've been there before. Iowa City, that is a popular stop. That is in the area around where old right-wing King, Steve King, comes from that area. And now they have casinos that had some things they didn't have at one time. And everyone's about the Pulitzer Prize. Let's see, what is going on here? Oh, Storm Lake editorial right. Oh, okay. In 2017, this is Art Cutlin. Became a nationally known figure. He already was prominent in Iowa. I don't know who he is, but anyway, a focus on poverty solutions. Not sure who's doing that. Jay Sandberg, a California entrepreneur. Oh, I see. Anyway, RV tours, I suppose they are out here. I'm not sure who is doing it. Many candidates have reached out early to Shotton, who rocketed national fame after nearly defeating old Steve King, the known racist they announced last month. Working Hero has held and set up forums around. Shed Brown will be there for that one. And even an Asian Latino coalition that's based in Des Moines, I suppose about the only place it could be reached. Well, Iowa has changed. A lot of the small towns now have a lot of Latinos that are affiliated with the packing industry there in Iowa. And let's see, Suburban Campaign Headquarters. I'm not sure who is in that, and it really doesn't say here, but gives you an idea of what is going on. Let's look at the 2020 endorsement circuit. We haven't looked at any of these. See if we can get this going here. Okay, 2020 endorsements. John Delaney. Well, who these people are endorsed by, we'll never know, but Donna Kernum, Mills County Democratic Chair, Kristen Gillibrand, Kaylor Patterson, the Iowa Democratic Stonewall Chair, Kamala Harris, endorsed by a former Secretary of State, Amy Klobuchar, has been endorsed by Andy McGirt, former chair and a gubernatorial candidate, and that was updated on the 17th. So we have somewhat of an idea of who is doing what and at what time. The real national emergency is the triviality of our politics. This is by E.J. Dionne. We have him featured quite a bit as a standard bearer for liberal politics in America. When the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, learned that Trump would declare a national emergency to ship money to finance his border, her denunciation was predictable, but her way of expressing outrage was not. The issue she used to make her point was important on many levels, observing the uneasiness even amongst many Republicans over Trump's abuse of power. She noted that if the president can declare a national emergency on something that he has created as an emergency and an illusion that he wants to convey, just think of what a president with different values could present to the American people. She then recalled the slaughter at Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School, that's in Parkland, Florida, on the 14th of February 2018. When 14 students and three staff members were gunned down. You want to talk about a national emergency, Pelosi asked. Let's talk about it today. 1 year anniversary of another manifestation of the epidemic of gun violence in America. That is a national emergency. Why don't you declare that an emergency, an emergency, Mr. President? I wish you would. And that could actually happen, and a number of results could happen very, very quickly. Our nation's deadly pervasiveness towards firearms is very much on Pelosi's mind, even before the Friday shooting in Aurora, Illinois. That was at a warehouse. It killed 5 people because on Wednesday the House Judiciary Committee had voted 21-14 to send a bill requiring background checks for all gun sales to the House floor. It was the first serious vote on gun reform measures. You notice how it's been changed. Now it's gun control. Reform. It used to be control. Since 2013, the Senate fell 6 votes short. That's a 60 vote cap there to end what they call cloture. Some people have talked about changing that around, but one has to think strategically, not particularly in 2019, but years beyond that, depending on whom or I should say who is in office. It could be a Democrat situation. Now, there are ways of going around a cloture. That's a 60-vote rule. And the Affordable Care Act was done in that manner, but it has to involve taxes. There are a number of requirements that has to be met for that special situation, such as the Trump tax cut bill that was done without the 60-vote majority, but done in a different way. During the Civil Rights era, civil rights legislation was tied up in that cloture rule of 60 votes. And there was agreement during Harry Reid that judicial nominees, they could proceed. This was just for judicial nominees to federal courts with less than 60 votes. So you didn't have to do cloture, just a majority votes. But that turned out not to be such a good idea, because had they kept that rule in and Harry Reid had not invoked it, then such people as Kavanaugh would have not be on the Supreme Court today. So you need to think about it in two different ways. In counting the many costs of the Trump era, we focus too rarely on the president's success in pushing divisive trivialities and self-interest contrivances to the center of the national concern. He manufactures crises and uses these manufactured crises to create new ones. A very good example of that is the so-called humanitarian aid to Venezuela. There is no crisis on our nation's borders. To the extent there are border problems, this will do a little or nothing to set them right. And Congress' decision not to finance Trump's monstrous waste of money in no way justifies the seizing of national emergency powers. His vast overreaching really does create a crisis which dominates the news and shoves aside other concerns. And this is the whole idea of this. EJ is correct about this. This whole idea of the border fight and declaring a national emergency. Even if Trump loses this, he still wins because he is able to get it in national media. It goes to courts. Whatever the court decides, that reappears in national media. He keeps that in there, and even if he loses a court battle here and a court battle there, that signals his base. That's free campaign time for him. So you need to look at this. People need to look at this in terms of what's going on. We talked about, I believe, last night about these various monies. There is one part of money that he could conceivably use that is available to him discretionarily, and there is another part of money that supposedly you have to use. I think that's the $3.3 billion that there's supposed to be an emergency, but there's $600 million that he can just move around like pieces on a dominoes board. Anyway, this vast, in the meantime, the problems that should engage our energies are forced to the back of the queue in the public attention. The normal or constitution approach to governing, but bills passed through committees, compromises reached in conferences. You don't use the conferences much anymore in conferees, and no matter how much journalists investigating and expose Trump misconduct, we should be grateful for this. I am the only one who Matter's approach to politics fits well with the needs of modern media, no doubt about that, both social and traditional. Click page views and ratings encourage everyone to dwell on individuals more than on issues, no doubt. This arrogance of a profound existing cynicism about the possibility of political action and defeatism is especially damaging when it comes to guns. Well, guns is an issue now that has more or less, except for the killings. And of course, you have killings in the African American community. You need to go to Chicago. For decades, as one massacre cascades into another, the gun lobby beats back even the most modest efforts to control access to firearms. The sense of doom about any progress is so deep that it obstructs overwhelming evidence that the politics of guns have changed. Even the most moderate Democrats may make opposition to the gun lobby a key component of their campaign in 2018. These victories that led last week's Judiciary Committee voting worked, and elections matter. Public sentiment prevails, and the Democrats made a difference. This is why what happened in the House last week on guns deserved a far more coverage than it got. It got very little coverage at all. Pelosi was right to use Trump's phony emergency to highlight a real one. The only cure for political cynicism is to show that the study and painstaking work of grassroots action can bear fruits, as it did in Lake City in Queens. The only alternative politics of a specular is for elected officials and a media to lift up problems that actually need solving. The problem here is what can be called the National Enquirer syndrome, such as the infamous Alex Jones and Company. These bold headlines get more clicks and make more money than normal, and this part of this is the entire tenure of the nation itself, where it is drifted to, and this goes to Hollywood, to cultural things that appear here, and people that are responsible for that. It's sort of like a lot of the Democrats now are attacking Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the monopoly media. That the Democratic Party is moving too far to the left, etc., etc. Well, these arguments complicate things. Because if you say, well, the Democratic Party is moving to the left, we have to find a candidate that is more to the middle. Well, you'll get a candidate that's more to the middle, but will that solve your problem or not? The 2016 campaign, if it proved anything else, Hillary Clinton was out there, an old line politician, etc., and lost the election. That's what people don't realize. But if you lose an election, you lose an election. The struggle continues on. As I was telling an individual, depending on how all this turns out, we'll get out the old Jill Green Party buttons. Coffee shop, Howard Schwartz, I assume he'll be out there. He'll be pulling the libertarian votes in. This thing will be sliced and diced in many different ways, period. So it's too early to see how the slicing and dicing on the Face the Nation. What was his name? The former governor of Virginia came up there. Used to be Clinton's money man. What's his name? I've got his name. Anyway, he has a new book out talking about Virginia's past and the reason for voter suppression as it applies to, i.e., felons. And most of the felons, of course, are followers of O.J. Simpson in more than one way, African Americans. So if you can trivialize the vote, as he said, it was aimed at quote-unquote the darkies. Well, you have the dark face operators running around out there, and at the same time, all of these various machinations in Virginia. Northam is going to stick around. They can't get him out of there. The Attorney General will go on. They will not. They'll let the ballot box decide where they are going. Fairfax, well, there's an investigation going on in Boston, and there's an investigation, I suppose, at Duke. But these are old events. More than 10 years old with him and the professor from Strips Howard there. Anyway, so much to that. Now let's move on to Florida. This is even more Sixth grader charged as misdemeanor after refusing to recite the flag. A Florida student is facing a misdemeanor charge after a confrontation with a teacher that began with his refusal to pledge allegiance to a flag. This was at the Lawton Child. Lawton Child used to be a governor of Florida, late Lawton Child. Middle Academy in Lakeland, Florida, that's east of Tampa, refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, telling the teacher that he thinks the flag and the national anthem are racist against African people. According to the affidavit, the teacher had what appeared to be a contentious exchange with him. If you live in the U.S., it's so bad, why don't you go somewhere else? That used to be a common slogan back in the 70s, America love it or leave it. And the rhetoric was, why do they send our boys to Vietnam? This is somebody named Ann Alvarez, who was substituting at the school, asked the student, according to a handwritten statement from her. They brought me here, the boy replied. Alvarez responding by saying, well, you can always go back because I came here from Cuba. And the day I feel I'm not welcomed anymore, I'll find another place to live. She then called the district office because she didn't want to keep dealing with the student, according to the statement. An official said the situation escalated. The student yelled at the dean and the school resource officer, that's for the local police, who came to the classroom, accused them of being a racist and repeatedly refused to leave the room, according to them. Suspend me, I don't care if the school is racist. The student, who is an African American, told the dean as he walked out of the room with his backpack. That's according to the affidavit. The student was later charged with disrupting a school facility. Now, this is a 5th or 6th grade resisting an officer without violence. The Lakeland Police Department said in a news release the student was not arrested for refusing to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. The arrest was based on the student's choice to disrupt the classroom, make threats, and resisting the officer's efforts to leave the classroom. He was an 11-year-old person. Tolbert Darashika Tolbert was not available for immediate comment Sunday, but she told Bay News 9 that the teacher was wrong and that the school overstepped its authority by punishing her son, who was taken to a juvenile detention center and suspended for 3 days. That was on the February the 4th. I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm hurt, and more so for my son. My son has never been through anything like this, and I feel this school should have handled it differently. If discipline action shouldn't have been taken, it shouldn't have been with the school. He shouldn't have been arrested. That's what she told the TV station. The affidavit, stated the student threatened to beat the teacher, but Tolbert told Bay News 9 that her son did no such thing. The Pope County Public School spokesperson, somebody named Keela Kennedy, did not respond. I imagine they didn't. K.O. Kennedy, sorry about that, told the Ledger that the students are not required to participation in Pledge of Allegiance. That was a Supreme Court ruling in 1943, West Virginia Board of Education versus Burnett. That schools cannot require students, this is involving some Jehovah's Witnesses. The Pledge of Allegiance and the National Anthem have been sources of tension. We go to Colin Kopanek, who recently settled with the NFL. In 2017, African student was expelled from her house, Houston High School, for refusing to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. India Landry, silent protest prompted a long legal battle in federal court. The teenager's family accusing the district of violating her free speech rights. Last year, the Texas Attorney General intervened and defended a state law requiring students to recite the pledge. It's unconstitutional. This is again what EJ was talking about, the waste of time. Let me see if we can get the Bay News up here. I'm not sure if we'll get this up here or not in time for you to hear it. They're attempting to do that. Okay, mother upset after her son is kicked out of class. This is the latest from Polk County. This is outside News 9 Spectrum, News 9 in Polk County. I'll come back to it. The incompatible audacity of Colin Kaepernick amazes his admirers in the NBA. This was incidentally All-Star weekend for the National Basketball Association. The team by, let me see, I'll have to look at the names of these teams. LeBron James' team won the NBA All-Star game. They used to do the East-West All-Star. They don't do that anymore. Oh well. They too have moved to the cult of the personality. Even the NBA, a league that flaunts its independence and progressive attitudes, the players appreciate Colin Kaepernick, a sports figure beyond their comprehension. He's not the prototype of modern athlete activist. He is an unattainable new standard. The NBA may, and this is in the Washington Post by Jerry Brewer on the 16th of February. As Kaepernick and the NFL ended one of the more provocative sports culture wars with the stunning Friday news dump of the settlement of his collusion lawsuit. It was striking to be at an NBA All-Star Game weekend and realize that both his signature and incomprehensible audacity, he just took on the NFL with it seemingly infinite funds and legal resolve and stubbornness. And start on until the league blinked. The NFL does not settle, at least not this soon. It doesn't matter whether the issue is health care for retired players or Tom Brady's deflated footballs. The league likes to fight. It likes to wear down its adversaries financially and emotionally. It likes to win and win clearly. But with Kaepernick, the former San Francisco 49 teammate, Eric Reed, their legal teams held their own and prospered. While the terms of the settlement are supposed to remain confidential, it is fair to speculate the players received a lucrative amount to end their lawsuits. Reed returned to the NFL with the Carolina Panthers last season. Kaepernick remains unsigned because of their social stance were bad for business. Or as at least it was a case that concerned the NFL so much that it went against the litigious instincts and made it disappear. During a time of NFL play unrest, we use the NBA as a symbol of contrast. The popular belief is that the NBA, as a player-driven league, would have handled the protesting players in a more thoughtful and less combative manner. And he goes on to their former commissioner Stern said the same thing, they're digging themselves into a terrible hole for us in the late 70s and 80s when there was a fair amount of racism exhibited about the players. We felt as a matter of policy we had to promote our sport players and show that we were real people. This is from Mr. Stern here. He's a former commissioner, David Stern. Made headlines last week when he suggested that if Kaepernick been in the NBA would have a job. No doubt he would. During the All-Star festivities Friday, said they admired Kaepernick as a maverick. They don't have to be. They are with him. They know they don't have to be with him. His journey marks a full, makes them feel a privilege. They understand him. Some interesting situations. LeBron James here You've got a guy who basically lost his job because he wanted to stand for something that was more than just him. I'm happy to see the news come out Friday that he settled his suit, and I hope the hell a lot of money can deal with that. Dwayne Wade praised him also because he educated all of us on something that we didn't know about, like James Wade trusts that overtime Kopenak's sacrifice will be less polarizing and more revered. For the NBA All-Stars, who said they'll do anything, that the high praise, not only because of Kopenak, like them, and he proved to the NFL that he's different and more formidable. And you can also say, because of his formidable stance, he was able not only to defeat the NFL, but to defeat DJ Trump. And this is something that has to be looked at from a cultural standpoint, from where the media stood against Colin Kaepernick, another phony issue out there of patriotism, of the flag, and what the flag means to people. Now, this would be one of those situations. He took a poll. A lot of people are going to say, well, yeah, we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, maybe they do and maybe they don't. There's not an infinite number of them that would actually be there for this flag. Let me move on here to Barack Obama, and reportedly set for a role in an NBA-backed African football league. The NBA is hoping to establish a new professional league in Africa and various nations. Barack Obama being involved over the weekend. This is again of the NBA All-Star Game. It was in Charlotte, North Carolina. The league announced a partnership with the FIBA, that's basketball's international governing body, to create an African league. It was reported by the Associated Press. President Obama said he's always loved basketball because it's about building teams that's equal to more than just the sum of its parts. And these teams would be in several countries, Kenya being one of those countries there. And for some of the people that have played from various countries, have played in the NBA, includes a 12 team field in Angola, Egypt, Kenya, Morocco, Nigeria, Rwanda, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia. While in office, of course, he had a gym in his place. You won't see DJ Trump have one in his place. I don't think we'll have to worry about that one. Now let me go back. And the mother that's upset here. Okay, maybe we can do this without logging in. We hope. And we're waiting to hear from the mother. And this is real clear politics. Okay. We'll look at some polling here and we'll see if we can.
A sixth grader at Lawton Child's Middle Academy was arrested and taken to a juvenile detention center, charged with disrupting a school function and resisting arrest without violence. It's a decision that's not sitting well with the student's mother, Dakira Talbot, who says her son is in gifted classes and has been bullied at the school before.
I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm hurt. More so for my son. My son hasn't never been through anything like this, and I feel like they should have handled this differently.
The February 4th incident started when a substitute teacher asked the 11-year-old boy to stand up for the pledge. He reportedly told the substitute teacher the flag was racist and the national anthem was offensive to black people. In a statement to the district, the substitute teacher reported telling the 11-year-old boy why, if it was so bad here, he did not go to another place to live. She said he then said, "They brought me here." And she said she told him, well, you can always go back, because she was from Cuba and the day she felt unwelcome here, she'd find somewhere else to live.
She was wrong. She was way out of place.
The substitute teacher then wrote she called the office because she, quote, didn't want to continue dealing with him. According to the arrest affidavit, the student was arrested because he refused to follow multiple commands, repeatedly called school leaders racist, and was disruptive. They said he threatened to get the school resource officer and principal fired and to beat the teacher, an accusation he says is just not true.
I want the charges dropped, and I want the school to be held accountable and the officer for what happened, because it shouldn't have been handled the way that it was handled.
Dakira Talbot says she and her son will now head to court on February 19th to fight these 2 misdemeanor charges. Reporting in Lakeland, I'm Stephanie Clay-Tor, Spectrum Bay News 9.
So you get it. That is actually what happened. Very interesting situation at best. Let me just check on our time here. We're running a little later. I was trying to get the Real Clear Politics in here. You just want to get some polling here to get you an idea of what is going on here with these various candidates. Now, it's very early. Some of the candidates in single digit at this rate in time. Doesn't really matter very much in terms of statistical integrity. It's just where they are. Now, this is on a Saturday. This is the Emerson poll we were talking about, and we'll just go to it. Okay, this was a question someone asked me about. The majority of Americans disagree with Trump's national emergency, despite a plurality agreeing with the border extension. Now, following the announcement, this was on Friday, 53% of Americans disapproved the declaration of national emergency on the southern border. But despite this, majority supported the wall in some form. Now, this is the way the question was, in some form. 48 supported extending the border wall, 42 supported maintaining existing wall, only 11% supported removal of the wall altogether. Now, this was registered voters, was conducted the 14th through 16th of February, the margin of error of plus or minus 3%. Trump's approval rating is at 51% here. A disapproval rate, sorry about that. His approval rate is at 43%, up from 42%. So he's upwards. He's up 1 point in this particular poll. Now, looking to 2020, Joe Biden maintains a lead amongst the Democrats at 57%. Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris follow. Bernie is at 17. Kamala Harris is at 15. No other candidate cleared the double digits. Amongst 18 to 34-year-olds, 35% support Bernie. Biden receives 18%, Harris 12%. The remaining Democrats are in a single digit. If you go to 35 to 54-year-olds, are split. Biden holds a plurality with 54%, with the remaining split evenly between Booker at 10, Harris at 13, Bernie at 14, and Warren at 12. It's the first time Warren shows up. Sanders leads in the western states with 53%. Harris is slightly behind at 22%. This is a good thing for Bernie to be out west. Biden is the only other candidate in double digits at 20%. Biden leads in other regions of the country with 37% in the Midwest and 30% in the South and 24% in the Northeast. Head-to-head here, hypothetical race, you'd have DJ Trump at 47% versus Elizabeth Warren at 53%, DJ Trump at 49% versus Bernie at 51%, DJ Trump at 48 versus Kamala Harris at 52%, DJ Trump at 47 versus Beto O'Rourke at 53%. If you notice here, Beto O'Rourke and Elizabeth Warren are both at 53%, Bernie at 51%, DJ Trump at 49%, Twitter King Booker at 51%, and Sherrod Brown, I'm not sure how this came out here, would be at 52% there. And other polls, he's in the single digits. Now, if you bring Howard Swartz in, if Howard Swartz is in the race, Trump receives 45%, Harris 43%, and Mr. Schultz 52%. When he's on the ballot with Biden and Trump, Biden maintains his 9-point lead with 51% to 45%. Swartz gets less in that matchup at 7%. Obama tops lists of favorable presidents in the last 40 years. This has changed a lot because President Obama had been down the list with 36%. I'm surprised DJ Trump would come in at 24%, followed by Reagan at 18% amongst Democrats. Obama is their favorite president. Republicans are more split, 44% picking Trump and 29% choosing Reagan. I imagine some of that's generational also. And we won't get into Russia here. Caller ID was conducted. 7th Professor Kimball here consisted of a registered voters. That's N equals 1,000. Credibility level is similar to most polls. With a plus or minus of 3%. So that's the answer there. The All-Star game. Basically, what they did here, LeBron's team and the Gannis team played the game, and it, of course, ended up LeBron James and company here. And the Gannis people, we had the score up here. I guess it changed over. What happened here with that? But anyway, some of the players here on both of these teams, LeBron, they've done this the last 2 years by... Instead of going as East versus West, college of basketball. While this is the men's half on a Sunday night, Houston was at Tulane. It was Houston 85-50. Ohio State at Michigan State. Michigan State 42-44. And finally Villanova and St. John's. St. John's at 71-65. On the women's side of the coin here, the University of Miami at 79 to Louisville at 73. University of Connecticut and UCF, Connecticut 78 to 41. Mississippi State and Texas A&M with Mississippi. All these are runaway scores, 92 to 64. And in Maryland and Iowa 86 to 73. Marquette in Milwaukee and Seton Hall. Marquette at 109 to 63. Stanford and USC. A 2-point game there. Stanford at 69 to 67. South Carolina and Florida. South Carolina 96 to 77. This is women's ball here. Kansas State and Texas. Kansas State 69 to 60. Wake Forest and Syracuse. Syracuse 77 to 57. 20-point game there. Arkansas and Kentucky. Kentucky 61 to 59, close game. Utah and Arizona State, another close game, 60 to 58, Arizona State. Pittsburgh and Florida State, 78, Florida State 46, Pittsburgh. And finally, Michigan State and Nebraska. Nebraska 82 to 72. And let's do the NFL here. Well, we'll see if we can get the NHL in here. If we can't, we'll have to let them go. Anyway, Levon outscored Team Gannis 96 to 69. NBA All-Star Game, a lot of three-pointers running here. Right and three-pointers running left. We saw a little bit of this, at least from ESPN. We did. And anyway, it was an all-star game, and that was basically it. See who took the MVP trophy here. Well, the final score was 161 to 144. And the NBP, Kyle Konzuma dropped a...
This is the Averys. This is the Averys.
Not sure what all this is. Anyway, the also
the hottest new bistro. Wait, and the hottest taqueria? And the hottest... What are those?
Not sure.
Oh, pierogies. And this is...
Anyway, we'll just end that little thing and see if we can get the scores from the National Hockey League, and we'll finish this up. If we can't, having a little bit of technical problems here, let's just hold WBRN Radio. We'll end this. This has been the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 18th of February, 2019. Boston Red from the Jerry Pippin Broadcast Center. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Good day.
Face the Nation. We're continuing our conversation with Texas Republican Congressman Will Hurd. To pick up where we left off, we were talking about how your home district is going to be impacted by this emergency declaration. Today, White House senior advisor Stephen Miller told Fox News' Chris Wallace that the White House has the authorities to build a couple hundred miles by the end of the next appropriations cycle, which is September 2020. You sit on House Appropriations. Can Congress or the courts stop the administration from getting the money to do this?
Well, what this national emergency declaration does is it says the president is going to obligate funds, so he's going to take funds from other places, but you can't spend $8 billion in the next 6 months. And so what I think you're going to see in the next appropriation cycle is restricting some of that funds. And then the question you have is when it comes to military construction, right? Can you take funds from that was going to be used to constructing things in the military? And you outlined a couple of items earlier in this segment, but how about the fact that in my district, in Del Rio, Texas, this produces more pilots than any other facility in the United States of America. If it rains more than an inch, the flight line gets flooded and they can't train. We've been working on fixing that. We're trying to get more additional funds. If you're going to reprogram money, that's a good place to spend that kind of money rather than trying to build a wall. And we have to remember, there's already 654 miles of wall or barrier or whatever you want to call it, steel fencing. The president has already been authorized over $55 million. In this last appropriation bill, he was able to reauthorize $750 million within Homeland Security. My concern is our government wasn't designed to operate by national emergency. Unfortunately, a Congress that existed before I was born usurped some of their power, gave some of their power away to the executive branch. Our government was designed for the most ultimate power, the power of the purse, to reside within Congress, and we shouldn't have an executive, I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat, that tries to get around Congress with this national emergency declaration.
So would you support a resolution to try to stop the president from doing that?
I would support something that reviews who can, how you declare a national emergency. I would support something that actually is going to prevent taking money out of military construction. That's going to go to our men and women who are willing to put on a uniform, put themselves in harm's way, and they need to make sure that we have the tools that they're properly trained and they're properly equipped to do things. So I'm always open to making sure that Congress takes back some of its power as a co-equal branch of government. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of conversations. We're almost in uncharted territory because I think, based on my research, this is one of the first times that there's been a disagreement between the executive branch and Congress on what is indeed a national emergency. It sets a dangerous precedent, but there will be a lot of people focusing on this over the next couple of weeks.
So to be clear, you are saying that this wall that you don't think the United States needs on national security grounds will actually adversely impact national security because it will hurt the readiness of some of these military bases in your district?
If you're taking money away from the military, we just spent the last 4 years rebuilding our military, making sure the men and women in our armed forces have the tools that they need. I don't want to see that money being taken away from that. We went through a number of hearings and investigations in order to figure out where that money needs to go. And so that is how our government is supposed to operate.
And you're confident that Congress can stop that money from being raided from those military construction funds, the $3.6 billion?
I would say that people are going to be exploring how that can ultimately be done because we're in uncharted territory. But I want to also make it clear that $67 billion worth of drugs are coming into our country. 400,000 people came to our country illegally last year. We have a problem at our border. We don't have what I call operational control of our border, meaning we know everything that's going back and forth across our border. So this is a problem. Mm-hmm. And the only way we solve the problem is looking at all 2,000 miles of our southern border at the same time. And the only way you can do that is with manpower and technology. In some places, a physical barrier makes sense where there's urban-to-urban contact. Again, we already have 654 miles of physical barrier. So we got to be thinking about the strategy, not a focus on just one tool within that strategy.
Congressman, thank you very much for joining us this Sunday. We will be right back with our...
How do you feel about your space? Is it just where you work?
David Nakamura covers the White House for The Washington Post. Rachel Bade covers Congress, and she has just moved over to The Washington Post. She's also a CNN political analyst. We want to welcome Eugene Scott to this broadcast. He's also with The Washington Post. And Leslie Sanchez is a CBS News contributor and a very familiar face to our viewers who tune in to CBSN, our digital network. Leslie, let me start with you. You heard the president lay out his case for this emergency. New York Times, though, in terms of writing about the fallout, said it was the most punishing defeat Mr. Trump has experienced as a president. Do you agree?
I don't think Republicans are going to agree on that. What's interesting, I was speaking to a lot of the legislative leaders and business leaders along the Texas-Mexico border, and they feel this is not a real solution, but a political one. But if you look at the fact that there's a tremendous amount of baseline support to secure the border, where the president does not have the support, is over 60%, according to what Gallup has been looking at, some other research, don't support the idea of a physical wall. So when it's parsing those words. I think, Margaret, if he can show he is securing with both technology, technical infrastructure, human capital, all the things that border enforcement is saying they need, then I think he's going to get a legislative win on that. However, if it just looks like a contiguous border, he's not. And I do want to point out the fact the president has walked that back. Mm-hmm. He was on numerous occasions saying, I want the wall go the entire 2,000-mile border, but that's not the reality. So with that extent and that in mind, I think we're making progress.
Can I just follow up on, your mention that this is a political solution? Republicans on the Hill feel the same way, and they're very annoyed in some cases that they're being sort of unwittingly dragged into the president's 2020 reelection effort. The president feels the Trump and that declaring this emergency is going to help his own reelection. But this is dividing lawmakers, and you just saw that with your interviews right there with Will Hurd saying this was a bad idea, that he could see constituents have their land seized and that it would be taking money from the military, with people like Lindsey Graham saying, this is going to secure our country. And so right now it's really dividing the party.
Just real quick on that part. And also in the conference, there was a big point of saying, not only with Congressman Hurd, but Congressman Henry Cuellar, who was also on the board of the Democrat, saying we want topography, the local law, leaders to be involved in the discussion, because you don't want to be building, eminent domain on people's lands, the issues of livestock and using the Rio Grande for other purposes. So there's a lot of disagreement on how that's done. But now that the president is backpedaling on how you secure the border, I think there can be a positive.
I would add one thing, was whether this is a win or a loss for the president. I mean, the president wants to be seen as the ultimate winner here, but just look at his news conference in announcing this. It took him about 5 minutes to even get to the idea that he was declaring an national emergency. He was acknowledging it was probably going to be stopped in court. He didn't act like a winner in sort of announcing this in the Rose Garden the way he did. He took questions on a lot of other topics, which is fine. We want to hear him make news. But if he really believed in what he was doing here, believed this was a really, truly winning strategy, I think you would have seen a much more determinative announcement in the way that he rolled that out.
But one of the reasons I believe that the president was not able to communicate the national emergency in a winsome way is because it's not winsome. It's widely unpopular with many people outside of his base, which is where the majority of voters are. We know that this is an approach that is popular with Republicans who back Trump, but we know that he won because so many independents came over to support him, and he needs those votes as well if he's going to do well in 2020. And recent polling, especially after the midterm, shows that he's not doing well with those voters.
Rachel, I want to ask you about the other news we have here from that tremendous interview with 60 Minutes and Andrew McCabe. Look, McCabe's gone. Jim Comey is gone. There's a new Attorney General, Bill Barr, who's now on the job, and Senator Lindsey Graham is now in the chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee. So where does all of this head next?
That story is not over. McCabe may be gone. Rosenstein is heading toward the exits. But this whole notion about this 25th Amendment and whether there was actually a conversation to try to oust the president or see if there was support to oust the president, Republicans are going to continue in that vein. And it's interesting from this interview, it looks like Lindsey Graham, as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, is going to pick up right where House Republicans left off when they lost the majority and Democrats took over. You know, before the past 2 years, Republicans in the House, they've sort of been doing this investigate the investigator, sort of an inquiry about whether there's bias at the FBI or the Justice Department. That has gone away. They've lost their subpoena power. And Graham is showing that he's not only going to pick that up, he potentially is going to go even further by telling you that he is willing to subpoena Rosenstein and bring in McCabe to actually ask him what happened with these conversations.
And where does that fit in, Eugene, to the political strategy here in terms of laying the groundwork for the Mueller report?
Well, I would imagine that in part it is to keep people questioning Mueller and the bias that the president believes exists within the FBI that's working against him. It's the whole witch hunt idea just taken to the next step, trying to put some meat on those bones and looking at people like Lindsey Graham to be able to do that and argue that the president's suspicions are credible and they're not irrational. Whether or not they're actually going to be able to do that, people are still waiting to see. But what we do know is that most Americans, according to polling we have in the Washington Post, want to see this investigation continue because they do believe that Mueller is more likely to be credible than the president himself.
David, switching gears here, we heard overnight that Heather Nauert, who had been at the State Department as an undersecretary and as a spokesperson there, is withdrawing her name from consideration to be the next UN ambassador. What happened? Why did she do that?
What we understand is that her nomination was languishing in part because her own team had not even forwarded all their necessary paperwork to the Senate committee that would have to do her oversight hearing. And I think the reason now we're finding out is that she actually employed a nanny who was in the country legally from another country, but had not been necessarily had a work permit to work here legally. Taxes were not being paid on time. Nauert had apparently flagged this internally, but it's become something of an issue of this potentially being a problem and a disqualifying a measure, something that would be embarrassing not only to her family, but also could stand in the way from the Senate moving forward. This is a blow to the administration, though, because she's certainly someone I think that the president had grown to trust in her role as a spokeswoman at the State Department. And he'd had his own, President Trump had his own problems with the previous UN Secretary, Nikki Haley, in some cases. And he believes this would be someone who would be very loyal to him. But they now seem to be making the decision to move on.
Leslie, is it disqualifying?
For some it is, and for some it's not. It just reminds me of the 1993 Nannygate, when you had the revelations, that Bill Clinton was trying to nominate not one, but two attorney generals that both had issues with nannies who were undocumented. But in more recent history, under Bill Clinton, and even if you think about under Trump, Wilbur Ross, who had undocumented, perhaps they didn't pay taxes on people that worked domestically in their household, they managed to get through. So they're threading that needle. I think it's changed a lot in that conversation. But again, going back to our first topic, it becomes an issue of labor and undocumented individuals working in these households and not paying taxes.
But Rachel, some have put this in the context of the president has had this happen with a few different nominees, or at least people he said he's going to nominate. Is the White House really setting up their selections for success? The president's tweeting this morning blaming Democrats for stalling his ambassadors from being confirmed.
Yeah, look, that's just a way to sort of shift the narrative and try to point the finger. There's been complaints, including by some Republicans on the Hill. The White House does not do enough to vet people before they actually put them forward. And so, yeah, this has been an issue. Mick Mulvaney, now the acting chief of staff, he had his own issue with not paying taxes for, again, I believe it was a nanny. So, again, it's an embarrassment for the administration. and Republicans would like to see them button that up before they actually move people forward.
And it comes on the heels of all this reporting in the Washington Post and other places, the New York Times, about the president's own employment of undocumented workers at his golf club for years, at a time that he was running for president and railing on the use of undocumented immigrants, now declaring this a national emergency. So this would have fed into all sorts of other questions that Congress and certainly Democratic lawmakers will want to ask.
Eugene, we had two of our senators as guests from Munich, from the security conference, and there's been a lot said about the importance or the statement being made to have such a big congressional delegation at what is a conference built around celebrating alliances, something that the administration is often criticized for not valuing enough. You had former Vice President Biden there. You had the current Vice President, Mike Pence, there. What was the reaction like in terms of Pence's message to the room?
Well, for the most part, it was silent. There was a lack of confidence in the message that Mike Pence was delivering, suggesting that the America First mindset that the president has been campaigning on and leading since entering the Oval Office is of the best interest for the world as a whole. On multiple occasions, lines that he's used to receiving applause and taking breaks for were met with silence, in part because we know that many of our European allies do not see the United States as any longer a world leader when it comes to security issues and boldly disagree with much of what the president has put forward. And it's telling to see how surprised Pence himself was that he wasn't met with the same type of support that he usually is met with when he's making these same statements on the campaign trail or within groups and here in the States that are used to supporting him and backing what the president believes to be in the best interest for the country and the world.
And David, in contrast to that, Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, was well received. Her remarks, it was noted, she said she doesn't understand how possibly her country could be called a national security threat when BMWs are made in the United States these days. It was almost like a laugh line at the president's trade policies here and saying here that he's vacating space to Iran. Our closest allies are really at a distance.
Yeah, it's no surprise that Angela Merkel's been at odds with President Trump, but she seemed, in this case, to be unbound by any concerns about her own political future, given that she's probably not, as said, she won't pursue another term as chancellor. But think about this. I was just thinking about last September at the UN General Assembly in New York. President Trump came up and said he'd done more than any other president in 2 years. He got laughed at. He went to France and Paris for the 100th year anniversary of World War I. And Emmanuel Macron, the French president, came up and delivered a very pointed rebuke of nationalism and things that Trump has talked about, with Trump right there in the audience. And now Vice President Pence goes to this Munich security conference and basically agreed with silence. I mean, what's worse, getting laughed at or having sort of radio silence? I'm not sure what's worse, but there continues to be this message, and Angela Merkel on her final sort of tour here in the next couple of years will be continuing to deliver this pointed rebuke of Trump.
I think that's why you saw a lot of lawmakers joining at Munich this weekend, because they wanted to go there to reassure our allies that we are still on your side. I mean, former Vice President Joe Biden also gave this speech to the audience talking about how when I travel around the country and I talk to Americans still see you guys as important to our national security, that we still want to be in NATO and we're not looking at leaving NATO. Even the president had talked about doing such a couple of weeks ago. So you're seeing this sort of bipartisan pushback on the president, including several votes in the House and the Senate where they've actually rebuked the president's foreign policy. So we're just going to have to see, as time goes on, are more Republicans breaking with him on that to push back and sort of reclaim our standing in the world?
I think it's an important point, and we'll leave it there on that. Also interesting that Vice President Biden, former Vice President, was there. We haven't heard a lot from those who are expected to throw their hat into the ring for 2020 on national security, but he staked that out, at least for the weekend. We'll be back in a moment with former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. The right rally in Charlottesville and how Virginia and the country continue to deal with racism. Good to have you here. Certainly your state of Virginia continues to deal with racism. The governor, Northam, who we heard from last week, has refused to resign, despite near universal calls among elected Democrats to do so. Can he survive?
Yes, I think he's made the decision he's going to stand, but the way that Ralph survives and brings Virginia back together, he's got to lean in on these very important issues, which I talk about in the book. He's got to use executive authority as governor. You know, I used executive authority. I took the Confederate flag off the Virginia license plates. I banned the box on any state employment forms. And as you know, I restored the felon rights of 173,000 individuals, more than any governor in U.S. history. I was sued by the Republicans. We ultimately won. And the reason I was so adamant about doing that was because of Virginia's racial history. It goes back to the Jim Crow laws. In 1902, a state senator, disenfranchisement of felons, a poll tax, and a literacy test, to put it in our Constitution. And his quote that day is, "I'm doing this to eliminate the darky from being a political factor in Virginia." Well, 114 years later, there was a new sheriff in town, and I was able to enfranchise all these people to give them a second chance. And this is what our leadership in Virginia needs to do. We need to lean in. We've had a horrible history. You look at Charlottesville, Margaret, I can't even say to you on TV what I heard that day against members of the African American community and members of the Jewish faith. These people walking down the streets, they used to wear hoods. They used to do it at night because they were embarrassed. They don't feel they have to wear hoods anymore, and they can do it in broad daylight. Something has gone wrong in our country. And I talk in the book about how we got to bring our country back together. We got to deal with the issues of the past, but we need to go forward.
What about the Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, who faces sexual assault charges? Can he survive?
Very serious allegations have been made. They need to be investigated. He has called for an investigation. The two women have called for an investigation. I believe this week in Massachusetts, they've opened up an investigation, and I believe the Duke University has opened up an investigation. So we will go through that process. What I'm hoping now is what has happened here that, we're a great state. And I was very proud as governor. I eliminated all the horrible biases that we had. Remember when I came into office, the Republicans had wanted to shut all the women's clinics down. We had horrible legislation against women, the transvaginal bill, horrible legislation against members of the LGBT. We got rid of all that. We became open, welcoming. That's why we got Amazon. There was no question. I put the bid in.
I want to ask you about that.
Yeah, that's why we got Amazon. You cannot succeed as a governor. You cannot grow your state unless you're perceived as open and welcoming to everyone.
Well, so New York, as you know, Amazon pulled out of New York after they had bid for this facility there. But some of the outcry locally and then nationally from progressives was saying this is a win against big corporations. This is a win for the little guy. I mean, for you, what do you think the impact is? Does this in any way paint the Democratic Party as well as anti-business?
I certainly hope not. Listen, I put the bid in for Amazon in September 17 while I was governor. Before I put the bid in, I worked with my state legislators. I worked with all of the local communities in Northern Virginia and Richmond and Hampton Roads. So when our bid went in, everybody was all in. I cannot for the life of you understand after this bid went in why the locals came out against it. You should have done the due diligence before you submitted the bid. It just doesn't make any sense. But more importantly, our bid, and we won, and we're going to create 25 up to 37,000 jobs in Virginia, high-paying jobs. You've got to build an economy for the future. I just read a report that artificial intelligence will eliminate 40% of the world's jobs in the next 2 decades. You better be creating new 21st century jobs. We welcome Amazon. Now, they don't get any money until they come in, create the jobs, and pay the taxes. It's all how you structure the deal. So if Jeff Bezos, if you're watching here, thank you for coming to Virginia. You don't want to go to New York? I would tell you, bring the other jobs to Virginia. We are an open, welcoming, dynamic state. We're the #1 state for cyber, for data, for unmanned systems.
I've got to, before I let you go, though, ask you, March 31st, you've set as your deadline to announce whether you're running for president. What are you waiting for? Is it Joe Biden?
I'm not. I have spoken with the vice president. I've made hundreds and hundreds of calls across the country. Talk to potential staff, and listen, we're close to make a decision. I want to see where the field is. I do think we need in this race a progressive governor who was very jobs-oriented, very successful in economic development. They're not mutually exclusive. A governor is a CEO. We build roads. We fix roads. We do need governors in this race because, we don't just get to talk all day. We got to deliver every single day.
Well, we'd love to have you back and talk about it when you're ready to make a decision, Governor. We'll be right back.